I arrived at the facility just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that pooled like ink beneath the towering glass and steel structure. The building stood out against the fading sky, a beacon of sterile modernity amid the creeping twilight. My footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as I crossed the threshold. The faint hum of machines and murmurs of unseen voices greeting me like a subtle invitation or a warning. At the reception, a woman approached Dr. Evelyn Marks, the lead researcher, her gaze sharp and calculating behind round glasses. She welcomed me with a measured smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the Lucid Dreaming Research Center," she said, her voice calm but laced with an undercurrent I couldn't place. "We're eager to begin your sessions." I nodded, my pulse quickening, a mixture of excitement and apprehension tightening my chest. The promise of exploring the depths of sleep, of bending dreams to will, was intoxicating. Yet, something about the facility's silence felt too perfect, too controlled. The initial testing was clinical and invasive. Technician Leo, a young man with an easy smile, fitted me with electrodes and sensors, explaining the protocols in a detached tone. "We'll monitor your brain activity closely," he said, adjusting the wires with practiced hands. "Your first session will be a baseline, a simple induction into the dream state." Lying back in the reclining chair, the cold touch of the sensors anchoring me to reality, I closed my eyes. The world melted away, replaced by a vivid landscape that shimmered with impossible clarity. I stood on a deserted street, the pavement cracked and glistening as if wet, though no rain fell. Buildings loomed, their edges subtly warped, windows reflecting not the sky but dark voids that seemed to swallow light. From the corner of my vision, a shadow shifted. I turned sharply, heart pounding, but nothing was there. Yet the sensation of being watched persisted, an unseen presence lurking just beyond perception. I called out, voice echoing unnaturally in the empty street. No response, only a whisper of movement and the faintest hint of a figure blurred, indistinct, but undeniably aware of me. I jolted awake, gasping as the sterile ceiling above greeted me like a cold slap. Sweat slicked my skin despite the cool room. Dr. Marks was there, her eyes fixed on the monitors, unreadable. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Uneasy," I admitted. "There was someone else, or something." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a hypothesis. "Dreams can be more than just personal experiences," she said cryptically. "Sometimes they hint at deeper connections." As I dressed and left the chamber, the hum of the facility seemed louder, the shadows deeper. I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence from my dream was not confined to sleep, that it had brushed against something inside me, something that would not let go. That night, as I lay in the sterile dormitory room provided for subjects, the line between anticipation and dread blurred. I was no longer just a participant, I was part of something larger, something unseen, waiting beneath the surface of my mind. The sleep depths had opened, and I was already drawn in too far. And yet, despite the unease, I was compelled to return, to dream again, to see who or what was watching. The experiment was only beginning, but I could already feel the pull of the unknown, dragging me into the dark. My first encounter in the dreamscape had changed everything, and I knew sleep would never be the same again. As I drifted once more toward unconsciousness, a final thought lingered. Was I the explorer in this strange new world, or had I become the intruder in someone else's dream? The answer remained just out of reach, hidden in the shifting shadows of the sleep depths. I remember the faint hum of the facility's machinery as I lay back into the reclining chair of the dream chamber. The room was dim, sterile, yet the air seemed charged with an unseen tension. Dr. Voss had just adjusted the neural interface around my temples, her gaze steady but unreadable. "Ready for the next session?" she asked. I nodded, swallowing a knot of anticipation, and something else I couldn't yet name. The moment I closed my eyes, the familiar pull swept over me, the sensation of falling sideways into the dreamscape. But this time, the landscape was different, less a fabricated wonder, and more a shadowed expanse, as if the colors had bled into grays and blacks. Shapes moved at the periphery of my vision, flickering between solid and vaporous forms. I tried to focus on one. A figure, tall and cloaked in darkness, stood just beyond the edge of a foggy glade. Its outline was humanoid, but the face was a void, shifting like smoke. "Who are you?" I asked aloud, even though I knew the dream would carry my voice to its own strange acoustics. The figure's response was a distortion, a whisper layered with static. "Intruder. You do not belong here." A chill crawled up my spine, deeper than any cold could reach. "I'm the participant," I insisted, voice quivering. "I'm part of the experiment." "No," it hissed, voice fracturing. "You invade what is ours." The dreamscape trembled, the trees bending as if swayed by a storm I could not see. The figure moved closer, its edges darkening, becoming more solid yet more threatening. I tried to retreat, but the ground beneath me seemed to warp and pull, making every step a struggle. When I jolted awake, sweat coated my skin, heart hammering in my chest like a frantic drum. The monitors lining the observation room flickered with traces of my neural patterns, erratic, fragmented. Dr. Voss was there, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. "Your brain activity is unusual," she noted quietly, "more intense than before." "They called me an intruder," I whispered, voice hoarse. "The figures, they said I don't belong." Her eyes flickered ever so slightly, a shadow passing before her professional mask. "Dreams are unpredictable," she said. "Sometimes the subconscious reacts in unexpected ways. We'll analyze the data." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the dream was not just a reflection of my mind, but a doorway into someone else's reality, and I was the unwelcome visitor. In the following sessions, the shadow figures multiplied. They lingered just outside my focus, their forms more defined yet still cloaked in darkness. I tried to reach out, to communicate, but their words were always cryptic, like fragments of a language I couldn't fully grasp. "You trespass," one murmured once, its voice a brittle rasp. "Our dream is not your own," I questioned myself. Was I losing my grip on the experiment, or perhaps on my own mind? One night, I found myself surrounded. The shadows closed in, their voices overlapping in a discordant chorus that echoed through the dreamscape. "Intruder, intruder, intruder," they chanted, their forms flickering with malevolent energy. Panic surged, and the dreamscape fractured like shattered glass, colors splintering into chaos. I woke again, breath ragged, hands trembling. Dr. Voss's voice over the intercom was calm but insistent. "We need to discuss your recent experiences. Please come to the observation room." As I sat before the glowing screens, I realized the experiment was no longer just a scientific test. It had become a question of identity and invasion. If they believed I was the intruder, then whose dream was I really in? And if the dream itself could accuse me, was I still the master of my own mind? The shadows were not just figments of my imagination. They were warnings, or maybe sentinels. And the deeper I delved into the dreamscape, the more I felt I was being watched and judged by something beyond understanding. The line between experiment and reality blurred, and I feared that the next time I closed my eyes, I might not return at all. The shadows waited, and they were not alone. The air in the sleep chamber was thick with a strange electric charge, as I felt the familiar pull of the dream beckoning me once again. I closed my eyes, letting the sensory deprivation mask the waking world, and plunged into the depths of my subconscious. But this time, the dreamscape was differentiated, unstable, as if the very fabric of my mind was tearing apart. I found myself standing in a narrow corridor bathed in a sickly yellow light that flickered intermittently. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing in and out like the ribcage of some colossal beast. Ahead of me, an ornate mirror hung crookedly on the wall, its surface cracked and rippling like water disturbed by a stone. As I approached, my reflection fractured, splitting into multiple images, each staring back with a different expression. One face was older, lined with sorrow and regret, eyes clouded with memories I did not recognize. Another was younger, sharp-eyed and burning with anger, lips twisted into a defiant sneer. Their voices overlapped, a discordant chorus speaking fragments of my past, some familiar, others alien. I reached out to touch the glass, but my hand passed through, the mirror dissolving into mist. Suddenly, I was no longer alone. The corridor widened into a shadowed clearing surrounded by gnarled trees that whispered secrets in a language I couldn't comprehend. From the darkness emerged the first of my parallel selves mirror, self number 1. His gaze was haunted, his voice trembling as he recounted a memory of loss, a woman I could almost remember loving, yet the details slipped away like smoke. "You don't belong here," he said softly. "This is my pain, my grief. How can you claim it as your own?" I tried to explain, but words failed me. The line between I and we blurred until I was unsure if I was the narrator or just another fragment wandering in this fractured dream. The ground beneath us shifted, and from the shadows, mirror self number 2 emerged with a ferocity that sent chills down my spine. "Intruder," he shouted, eyes blazing. "You invade our memories, distort our realities. You're the parasite. This dreamscape is ours, not yours to corrupt." His accusations were like knives, piercing the fragile veil of my identity. I felt a surge of paranoia swell within me, the boundaries of self dissolving into a chaotic storm. The dreamscape warped, walls bending and twisting into impossible angles, time dilating and snapping like a frayed wire. Then came the shadow figures, dark humanoid shapes with edges that flickered and blurred. Their voices rose in a cacophonous chorus, overlapping into a dreadful symphony. "You trespass, you disrupt. You are the intruder." Their words echoed endlessly, reverberating through the hollow spaces of my mind. I tried to plead, to assert my reality, but their accusations drowned me in a sea of doubt. Was the first, the invader, a parasite upon these parallel existences? Or was I the original, fighting to reclaim my fractured self? The dreamscape shattered around me, fragments of memory, emotion, and identity colliding in a dizzying kaleidoscope. I awoke gasping, sweat slicking my skin, heart hammering with a terror that lingered beyond the veil of sleep. I was no longer certain who I was, or whether the intruder was me. The conference room was colder than I expected, the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights mixing with the low murmur of the team gathered around the table. Dr. Miriam Voss stood at the head, her expression unreadable, a set of complex graphs flickering on the screen behind her. The data was unsettling, overlapping dream patterns, shared neural signatures that defied conventional understanding. "We have confirmed," she said, voice steady but edged with something I couldn't quite place. That several of our subjects have reported experiencing overlapping dreamscapes. A collective breath seemed to catch in the room. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the sterile air suddenly heavy. Overlapping dreams. The concept was more than theoretical now, it was happening. And I was part of it. When the next session came, it was unlike any dream I had experienced. The usual darkness gave way to an urban landscape, twisted and unfamiliar but eerily alive. Streetlights flickered in hues of sickly green and violet, casting shadows that danced with a life of their own. The air was thick, the scent of damp concrete mingled with something metallic, sharp. Then I saw them, Lena and Mark, faces from the facility, fellow test subjects who had haunted my waking thoughts but never my dreams. They were there, as real as I was, their eyes wide with the same confusion and dread I felt. "You're here," Lena whispered, her voice trembling but accusatory. "You shouldn't be here." I wanted to respond, to ask why, but the words caught in my throat. The dreamscape around us shivered, reality bending and twisting. Our voices overlapped in a cacophony, echoing off the warped buildings. I felt my grasp on the world slip as Lena's stare bore into me, her fear mingling with anger. Mark appeared then, his figure flickering like a faulty projection. "This isn't supposed to happen," he said, voice low and urgent. "You're disrupting something fundamental." The dream began to fracture. Walls twisted into impossible angles. The sky cracked open like shattered glass. Panic surged through me as the environment spiraled into chaos. I reached out, trying to hold on to something, anything that felt real. In that moment, I questioned everything. The experiment, my own mind, the very fabric of reality. If our dreams were intertwined, whose dream was it? And if I was the intruder in theirs, what did that make me? I awoke gasping, the cold sweat on my skin a stark contrast to the fevered nightmare I had just escaped. But the questions lingered, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The shared hallucination was no longer a scientific anomaly, was a warning. The boundaries between us were dissolving, and in the depths of sleep, I feared we were losing ourselves entirely. The next session loomed, a descent into unknown territory where the collective nightmare awaited. I had to face it, to understand it, or risk being consumed by it. The intrusion was not just in the dream, it was inside me. The cold hum of the facility's machines faded into the background as I slipped once again beneath the veil of sleep. The induction chamber's sterile walls dissolving into shadows that clung to the edges of my consciousness. But this time, the dream welcomed me, not with the gentle embrace of lucid exploration, but with a suffocating grip of hostility. I found myself standing in a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The walls throbbed with a faint, sickly green light, pulsating in rhythm with a heartbeat I could not locate. The air was thick, almost viscous, and whispers curled around me from unseen crevices, half-formed words that slipped away just as I tried to grasp them. Panic rose in my chest, tightening like a vice. As I moved forward, the corridor twisted unnaturally, angles bending where they should be straight. The floor beneath me felt unstable, as if the very fabric of this dream was fraying. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, dark, shifting, and indistinct except for eyes that glowed with an icy blue light. The figure's voice was low and accusatory, cutting through the oppressive silence. "You have no right here. You tear through our worlds like a plague." I tried to respond, but my words stumbled and dissolved in the thick air. The figure's expression, if it could be called, that was one of contempt and profound pain. Others began to materialize, their forms flickering like static on an old television, surrounding me in a tightening circle. Their accusations echoed in my mind, a chorus of voices condemning me as an intruder disrupting their existence. Desperation clawed at my mind. I attempted to command the dream, to visualize an exit, but the labyrinth shifted with every thought. Corridors looped back on themselves, staircases descended into impossible depths, and doors led to rooms that were mirrors of each other, each more disorienting than the last. Time seemed to bend, clocks melted into puddles of liquid metal, their hands spinning in maddening loops. When I finally awoke, sweat-drenched and heart-hammering, the sterile white ceiling of the facility greeted me, but the nightmare clung to me like a second skin. "Doctor." Halverson's concerned gaze met mine as she entered the room. "Your vitals are spiking," she noted calmly, though her eyes betrayed unease. "How do you feel?" I forced a shaky smile. "Like I'm losing myself." Days blurred together. Outside the dream, my reflection betrayed the toll. I caught glimpses of myself in cracked mirrors, fragmented images that flickered and fractured, as if my very identity was splintering. The shadows from the dream seemed to leak into my waking hours, lurking just beyond sight, whispering accusations that gnawed at my sanity. Each subsequent session plunged me deeper into the labyrinth. The hostile figures' voices grew sharper, their presence more oppressive. They spoke of balance, of boundaries I had crossed, of worlds unraveling because of my trespass. They called me an intruder who tore at the fragile threads binding their realities. I tried to plead, to explain that I was only a subject, a participant in a controlled experiment. But the dream rejected my reason. Logic crumbled beneath the weight of fear and confusion. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making, a prisoner of a dreamscape that had become a hostile realm. Back in the waking world, my body showed signs of strain. My hands trembled, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm. The researchers monitored me with increasing concern, but the experiment pressed onward. The facility's sterile halls felt colder, less inviting. One evening, alone in my quarters, I stared into the fractured surface of my mirror. My reflection wavered, splitting into multiple versions of myself, each one a whisper of a parallel existence, fractured by the intrusion. The shadows danced behind me, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. I realized then that the dream was no longer just a dream. It was a battleground where my identity was under siege, where the boundaries between self and other, dream and reality, had all but vanished. The question that haunted me was no longer if I could escape, but if I could survive intact. As the facility's lights dimmed for the night, I closed my eyes, knowing sleep would come again, bringing with it the maze, the shadows, and the chilling accusation I was the intruder within. The nightmare was only beginning. The moment I stepped outside the facility that morning, the world seemed wrong. The sky was a dull smear of grey, and the city streets glistened with rain, reflecting the neon signs in broken, flickering shards. But as I walked, the signs began to twist, their letters warping into faces that whispered accusations in a language just beyond comprehension. "You are the intruder," they hissed, voices merging into a chilling chorus that wrapped around my mind like a vice. I blinked, trying to shake the vision, but it clung stubbornly, an echo from the depths of my dreams bleeding into waking life. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally. Every passerby's glance felt laden with suspicion. I was no longer certain where the dream ended and reality began. Back at the facility, I found Dr. Evelyn Harrow waiting for me. Her usual clinical detachment was tempered by a flicker of concern in her sharp eyes. "Tell me everything," she urged, her voice steady yet fragile. I recounted the city's distorted faces, the voices that whispered beneath the rain's steady patter. Marcus, the technician, hovered nearby, adjusting equipment nervously. "This isn't typical," he muttered, eyes darting between monitors and me. Dr. Harrow sighed, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the table. "The boundaries between our waking minds and the dreamscape are more porous than we anticipated. It seems the experiment is influencing your perception beyond controlled sessions." Her words offered no comfort. The walls of my apartment, dimly lit and silent, had begun to breathe in the nights. Shadows curled and twisted, forming grotesque versions of myself, each one a fractured echo of memories and emotions I could barely grasp. They whispered secrets, half-formed and haunting, eroding my sense of self. I reached out to touch the closest shadow, and it recoiled as if alive, leaving me trembling in the dark. The research team's concern grew palpable. Yet, despite the risks, they insisted the experiment must continue. "We're on the verge of a breakthrough," Dr. Harrow declared, eyes gleaming with a mix of hope and something darker, something I couldn't quite place. During a late-night session, the lab hummed with an eerie electrical interference. My vitals spiked erratically, the monitors beeping frantically. Suddenly, I screamed a roar, primal sound caught between waking and dreaming. The room around me blurred, and I felt myself slipping into a void where time and space folded like paper. When I awoke in the sterile light of the control room, Dr. Harrow knelt beside me. "You're pushing the limits," she said softly, but her hands trembled slightly. "We have to understand what's happening before it's too late." I wanted to trust her, but the fractures within me deepened. Were these hallucinations just side effects of the neural interfaces, or was something more sinister at play? Was the experiment a gateway to something beyond understanding, or a trap designed to shatter the mind? As I left the facility that evening, the rain returned, cold and relentless. The faces in the neon signs whispered still, and I wondered if I would ever find the line between the self and the intruder, or if both had already been consumed by the depths of sleep. The echoes of reality were growing louder, and I feared they might never fade. I drifted into the experiment chamber with a weight heavier than before, the sterile walls closing around me like the narrowing corridors of some unseen maze. The familiar hum of machinery was a distant lullaby, luring me into the liminal space between consciousness and oblivion. As the sedation took hold, my thoughts fragmented, a kaleidoscope of memories, fears, and shadows merging into one impossible reality. The dream unfolded not with the fluid grace of my earlier sessions, but as a jagged, unstable landscape. I found myself standing in a vast, empty void, an expanse of blinding white that stretched infinitely in every direction. It was not peaceful. It was a blank canvas, trembling with latent chaos. Then, from the brightness emerged a figure, me, but not me. His eyes bore into mine, heavy with accusation and sorrow. "You don't belong here," he said, voice low and rough, like gravel scraping against glass. "Your presence fractures us. Each dream you invade fractures my world and others like it." I swallowed, struggling to grasp the weight of his words. "I'm just a subject," I replied, "a test participant." "I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't matter," he interrupted. "You are the intruder. We are all fragments of what you could be, or what you might have been. You are tearing the fabric that binds us." As he spoke, the void shifted. The white expanse cracked and splintered, revealing shards of memories, scenes from my life and his, overlapping and colliding in dizzying succession. Each shard reflected a different version of myself, the confident, the broken, the hopeful, the despairing. They flickered like dying stars, fragile and ephemeral. A fractured mirror materialized between us, its surface rippling as countless reflections screamed silently, their faces contorted with silent agony. The cacophony of unvoiced cries echoed in my mind, a torment that reached beyond words. Panic clawed at my chest as the edges of the dreamscape began to dissolve into a labyrinth of twisting corridors. Neon lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the cold metallic walls that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat not my own. Whispers slithered through the air, distorted, overlapping voices speaking in tongues I could not understand but somehow felt deep in my bones. Each step I took echoed with the weight of fractured realities colliding, threatening to swallow me whole. Somewhere in the distance, the voice of Dr. Hale penetrated the chaos. "Stay with us," she urged, her tone laced with urgency. "We need you to hold on." But the dream was no longer a controlled experiment. It had become a battleground. My parallel self advanced eyes blazing with a desperate clarity. "You must choose," he said. "Surrender control to preserve what remains, or risk shattering everything, including your own mind." The corridors twisted and folded, a maddening maze reflecting my inner turmoil. Memories collided violently, faces from my past, echoes of laughter and screams, moments of joy and despair, all bleeding into one another, until I could no longer distinguish where I ended and they began. I felt my identity unraveling, threads of self pulled taut and frayed. But beneath the chaos, a fragile ember of determination flickered. Was surrender truly my only option? Could I wrest control back from the fracturing dream, or was I doomed to dissolve into fragments forever? The parallel self reached out, hand trembling but resolute. "Look at me," he implored. "We can survive this if you choose to let go." I hesitated, the weight of countless possibilities pressing down on me. The dreamscape trembled, the space between us quivering like a fragile thread stretched to breaking. In that suspended moment, the decision hovered, a razor's edge between salvation and oblivion. Then, the world cracked open once more. The whispers surged into a deafening roar, the labyrinth collapsed into stardust, and I awoke, gasping, drenched in cold sweat. Dr. Hale's voice was distant but insistent. "How do you feel?" I swallowed hard, my mind still caught in the aftermath of the confrontation. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm afraid I might be the intruder they warned about." Her eyes glinted with something unreadable. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but sometimes understanding the intruder is the first step to reclaiming control." As the room around me settled back into sterile normality, I realized the nightmare was far from over. Somewhere deep inside, the battle raged on, between fractured selves, between reality and dream, between control and surrender. And I knew that when I closed my eyes again, I would have to face the intruder once more. But this time, I would be ready. I jolted awake, my body drenched in cold sweat, the sterile white ceiling panels above me blurring in and out of focus like the shifting shadows of my dreams. The hum of machinery filled the room, an omnipresent drone vibrating through the walls and into my bones. Blinking rapidly, I tried to steady my breathing, the line between sleep and wakefulness dissolving into a haze of confusion. Was this reality, or just another layer of the dream? I had no way to tell anymore. The experiment was over, or so they told me. But the images, the voices, the intruders, they lingered like ghosts beneath my skin. Dr. Alora Miles stood at the entrance of the chamber, her usual composed expression now tinged with a subtle, almost imperceptible strain. Her eyes met mine with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Welcome back," she said softly, stepping closer. The final session has concluded. I struggled to sit upright, my limbs heavy, my mind fogged by the lingering remnants of the dreamscape. "Did it work?" I asked, voice rough. She hesitated, glancing at the monitors behind her that flickered with complex neural patterns and erratic spikes. "The data is inconclusive," she admitted. "Some subjects reported residual hallucinations. Others showed unexpected neural synchronizations. Your readings were among the most unusual." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deep. "Unusual how?" "Your brain activity suggests a merging of multiple consciousness states," she explained, voice low. "We observed what we believe to be shared dream phenomena, overlapping realities within the dream space, and perhaps beyond." A shiver ran down my spine. The faceless figures, the shadowy reflections of myself, the whispers accusing me of intrusional, had been more than hallucinations. Or were they manifestations of a fractured psyche, splintered by the strain of the experiment? But what about the intruders? The ones who said I was the intruder? I asked, desperation creeping into my tone. Dr. Miles regarded me steadily. "We cannot say for certain. The boundaries between self and other, dream and reality, have blurred beyond our current understanding." I felt a sudden, sharp pang of isolation. The facility, with all its gleaming surfaces and cutting-edge technology, seemed less like a place of discovery and more like a cage for truths too dangerous to face. As I was escorted out of the chamber, the corridors stretched endlessly hallways I thought I knew, now warped and unfamiliar. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. A sudden reflection caught my eye in a polished glass panel. A figure resembling me, but distorted, with eyes that held both accusation and sorrow. For a moment, I thought it mouthed words, but they were lost before I could grasp their meaning. The whispers began then, faint and fragmented, echoing from unseen corners. They spoke of secrets buried beneath layers of consciousness, of experiments reaching beyond ethical bounds. I pressed my hand to the glass, the cold surface grounding me, yet somehow amplifying the unease that gnawed at my mind. Later, alone in my quarters, I scrawled notes, feverishly questions, sketches, fragmented memories, trying to piece together the puzzle. Had I been an intruder in someone else's dream? Or were the intruders inside me, fractured selves vying for control? The facility's silence on these matters only deepened my suspicion. A sudden knock at my door jolted me. A technician, nervous and shifting from foot to foot, handed me a sealed envelope with no return address. Inside were cryptic symbols and a single phrase: "The sleep's end is only the beginning." My heart pounded. What had I truly been a part of, and what awaited me beyond the veil of sleep? The line between waking and dreaming had dissolved. I was no longer certain where I ended and the intruders began. The experiment had changed me irrevocably, shattering my sense of self and reality. And somewhere, deep within the facility's labyrinthine corridors, secrets waited patient and watchful as if the true experiment had only just begun. I stared out the window, the city lights flickering distantly, and felt the cold, creeping certainty that I might never find my way back to the reality I once knew. The sleep's end was not a conclusion, but an unsettling threshold, and beyond it, the unknown waited, silent and infinite.